Okay, well, that surge in the number of jobless South Africans is piling up the pressure on government to turn this ailing economy around. Now, Stats SA has put the unemployment rate in the second quarter at 29%. If you're wondering how much that is, that's about 6.7 million working age individuals who are out of work. The number swells to 10.2 million people when discouraged workers are considered, putting the expanded unemployment rate at 38.5%. Analysts say the current environment is not helping, where you have government pouring billions into bailing out state firms. Well, where investors who would ultimately create jobs see the political infighting as encouraging that's going on is not encouraging investment. Well, Devin Morgan is going to break it down for us. For those of us, Devin, who don't understand the impact of the numbers we are hearing, tell us what it means for people out there.
All right, so I'm going to repeat everything you said because these numbers are dismal, they're frightening, and they've increased. Okay, so today's Stats SA reminding us just how much work government has to do by putting up that number, 29%. That's your official unemployment rate released today. And as you said, Yuveka, what does that translate to in terms of numbers of people out of work? 6.7 million. But that's if you follow the official unemployment rate. If you look very carefully at what analysts say would be actually a better reflection, a unique reflection on what the situation is, it's this number, the expanded unemployment rate, 38.5%. It basically includes those people who have been discouraged and stopped looking for work. It means that 10.2 million people are out of work in this country, working age people. We dig further into this, and the really sort of stain on our unemployment figures in this country is this bracket, the youth unemployment, 15 to 24 years of age. That rate is sitting at 56.4%. It gives rise to a very restless youth in this country. What makes matters worse is, as Stats SA tells us, that a large portion of that particular bracket is not in any form of work, not in education or training, which leaves them in a very compromising position. Just a quick one before we move on to tackle this. If you look very deeply into which sectors have been shedding jobs, the formal sector, 49,000 jobs shed in the period between April and June, which means not only are there not enough jobs available, we're also shedding jobs in the formal sector. Of course, the informal sector will absorb some of those people. We've seen some jobs increase there. And your last icon, which shows private households, it says that 49,000 people were shed from private households. And again, it perhaps just shows you the strain on household finances that they would have to shed some of those jobs employed in those households. So what does this mean in a broader context internationally? How are we doing as a country? If you take the BRICS grouping alone, and you look at the BRICS countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and then little South Africa at the end, that's how we compare. China, with over 1 billion people, has an unemployment rate officially at 5%, and then the figures for both Russia, India, as well as Brazil shown there, with South Africa right on top at 29%. Certainly, indeed, a very frightening figure. All right, let's get more analysis now. Anne Bernstein heads up the Center for Development and Enterprise. And thanks for coming in. It's a given that this economy is too weak to create jobs. But I was wondering if we could zone in on the education system. It just appears that we are not churning out appropriately skilled people for this economy.
Absolutely. South Africa's basic education system, as we know, is failing the large majority of its learners. It's something like 70 to 80% of the schools are just not giving a quality education to mainly poorer South Africans, and that then disadvantages them in terms of going on to tertiary education or into the workforce. So the quality of our skills as a population is very bad. And frankly, I'm stunned that we aren't doing more to really wrestle with the nettle of reform in basic education. Now, the problem is that we have chosen a development path which is high skill and high wage. That was the theory. And that's just not working. This isn't a debate anymore.
Yeah.
I think the evidence is in. South Africa said we were going to be different from the rest of the developing world and the world, really, all of whom went through large sort of many years of unskilled work in factories and other places where people got very basic wages. But this changed. South Africa thought we could just leapfrog in the democratic era to a different approach, and that is clearly not working, with these devastating numbers just going up and up and up.
Creating more low-skilled jobs. It might make the unions unhappy with the pay concerns that they have. How far would this remedy go in?
Well, we don't know. So I think the big lesson coming out of today's terrible news on all fronts is that the current approach by government isn't working. And you can't just talk about jobs, you can't tweak policies, you actually have to reform some fundamental ways in which our economy operates to encourage investors to come in, to encourage people to hire more labor. We have to change the incentives here, and we have to try some new things. We've been pushing for a long time that in addition to labor market reform, which is long overdue, we should experiment with an export processing zone for labor-intensive factories in probably Nelson Mandela Bay, where we've already invested money in Kucha. There's available land. Let's try something. Ethiopia is trying it. Other countries are trying it. You have to find your niche in the global value chains and markets, but South Africa is not even prepared to try this.
If we go ahead and try something like that, is the minimum wage that we set too high for that particular remedy?
Well, as you know, we certainly did not advocate the national minimum wage, and I would argue that today's numbers raise an interesting question. We're busy looking into this, but the question is twofold. Is the national minimum wage encouraging some of those discouraged workers to come back into the labor force and not find any jobs? And as the numbers starting to drop in the households and elsewhere, are we starting to see the results of this high national minimum wage we've introduced? So that's a question we would put on the table. It has two dimensions. The way we could get around the national minimum wage in, say, an export processing zone is with the government's policy of the employment tax incentive. It would need to be applied to more than just young people, but anyone working in such a zone. And we think it should apply for a longer period than the current, I think it's a 2-year period or 3-year period. So that could bring you close to not the lowest wages, say, in some countries like Bangladesh, but certainly we could be competitive with Cambodia and a number of other countries and try and find a niche in the labor-intensive market for garments, for toy assembly, for electronic assembly. So that would be one strategy, but we're not even trying that. But I think the key lesson out of today's numbers is stop tweaking and start wrestling with some fundamental reforms, because if we keep going on the road we're on, the numbers are just going up and up, and that means hundreds and hundreds of people join the unemployed every day. People who are looking for work, that number is growing.
Indeed. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Anne Bernstein, who heads up the Center for Development and Enterprise, thanks very much indeed for talking.